it's been a productive week. Last week we dealt, I guess it was this week, we dealt with moving out the medical marijuana bill. Also, we've had discussions a little bit about transportation. That's why we have Senator King here. And I think there's a oil train safety moving forward and Joel's Law. So that's kind of what's been going on in the Senate. Before I introduce my colleagues, I'll turn it over to Representative Christensen.
Thank you, Senator Parlett. I'm Dan Christensen, 39th District, and I am the House Republican leader. I've got with me today Representative Orcutt and Representative Rodney with respect to questions, hopefully, that you're going to have regarding transportation and or health care and the like, or even judiciary. We have been quite busy in the House as well. We've got a number of bills that we were able to pass out last week, and we've got a whole bunch more on the slate to try and get out of here this week. I'm hoping one of the things that we're going to have an opportunity to talk about a little bit today too, if you don't bring it up, I will, ports and the impact that the ports and what's going on with our port system is going to have on our bottom line in Washington State, especially at a time when we're trying to balance budgets and the impact financially they're going to have on us, especially as we start getting into the revenue forecasts that we're going to be seeing in the middle of this year. It's going to be potentially a budget buster for us when it comes to making long-term, sustainable decisions about our budget today. With that, Senator.
Thank you. So I'd like to introduce both Senator King, represents the 14th Legislative District. He is our lead on transportation, and also Senator Bailey from the 10th District, who is our lead on higher education. Do you want to start?
Oh, I can start. Yes. So obviously, hopefully you are aware that we rolled out a transportation new revenue proposal last week, and we are planning on hearing the reform bills today in our meeting at 3:30, and so this is kind of reform week, but we anticipate hearing the revenue, the spending bill, and the bonding bill on Wednesday, and then start executing those bills out on Thursday. So we believe we're going to have a lot of discussion in the next 2 days, but I would tell you, I think a lot of it, and most of it, I believe is going to be positive. So we're anxious to hear what people have to say and move this proposal forward. Once we can get it out of committee, then we'll see what we can do with it on the floor as we get it out of rules.
Senator Bailey?
Thank you. This week we're going to be doing quite a number of things, and we have been in higher education. Tomorrow, or actually possibly this afternoon, but definitely today, we're going to hear the College Affordable Program bill that some of you heard about earlier. And we're going to have a hearing on that, as well as then we've already heard and probably will exec out a study on cost drivers in higher education. It's time that we really go and look at exactly what is causing the continual rise in college education. And so looking at it from a holistic standpoint, I think is very important. We have several other bills that are equally as important that will be moving out of committee. This is cutoff week, and so we have a very full agenda today and on Thursday.
Representative Orcutt.
Thanks, Dan. Representative Ed Orcutt, 20th District, the ranking minority member on the House Transportation Committee. Along with Senator King, we've been working on reforms in transportation for the last couple of years. We had a cost driver study here a couple of years ago, and that's helped give us some ideas on things we can do. Some of the things that we have been working on, the public-private partnership, Hans Zeiger has a bill, streamlining replacement bridges, another Zeiger bill, streamlining local replacement bridges by Representative Hayes. Allowing or requiring all transportation projects to be done by design build, taking some of the risk off of the taxpayers, putting it onto the contractors. We believe there can be a lot of savings there. Practical design, that's one of my bills. We'll have a hearing on that bill. It's 2012. We'll hear that tomorrow in Transportation Committee. DOT is doing some practical design now. We just want to make sure it's done throughout the state, across all regions, and across all projects. And we want to make sure that it's in statute so that even if our current director is committed to it, you know, she's not going to be the director forever. None of us are going to be here forever, so we want to get it into statute so that continues on, and that DOT, whoever may lead it at any given time, knows that that is the process that we want to see used. They are seeing some pretty good savings in projects based on their designs now and their estimates, seeing anywhere between 15 and 65% savings in projects. Obviously, it's a limited number of projects, but it clearly shows that there can be some significant savings in projects by using that. Another issue that we are very supportive of is sales tax going into transportation. Those are gas tax dollars on transportation projects that should be going for transportation. So that money comes back in sales tax. It should be going into the general fund. So a lot of areas where we've been working together. We might have slightly different approaches, but we're going to continue to work together with Senator King and members of the majority in the Senate to get reforms passed, to get the accountability that we believe that we need and that we believe that our taxpayers absolutely deserve.
Representative Rodney.
Just want to again reiterate in terms of transportation reforms. I think the approach should be fix it before we fund it. In Judiciary, the ranking Republican on the House Judiciary Committee, we've been really focused on making improvements to our mental health system this session. There was mention made of Joel's Law that's now over in the Senate. We hope that we can work with Senate colleagues to get that bill to the governor's desk. And I'm just here to, again, provide any additional information you all want or want to talk about in terms of healthcare or judiciary.
Okay, we're open for questions.
Well, today I'm writing about vaccines, not transportation, so. So I know Representative Rodney, you were on the committee today that heard the bill to remove the personal philosophical opposition exemption, so I wanted to get your thoughts on that, but I also wanted to hear from the rest of you as well.
Yeah, I thought the testimony was pretty compelling in terms of some of the risks associated with the vaccinations. Some of the parental accounts were pretty heartfelt and compelling about what happened to their children post-vaccination. A lot of statistics were discussed. I need to go back and do some independent review of some of the statistics. I think one comment was made that Mississippi's got the highest vaccination rate and yet the highest infant mortality rate, and I want to confirm things like that. But what this bill would do is remove the personal and philosophical exemption. The religious exemption would still be intact. I think that's significant. I think a lot of the individuals who testified this morning would qualify for that religious exemption provision that will remain in statute even if this bill goes forward.
Do you have concerns about lowered herd immunization? It sounds like our rates are pretty low compared to others in the country, with Oregon having a lower vaccination rate. And in light of potential whooping cough a couple of years ago and now measles, I mean, what are your thoughts generally?
No, I certainly have a concern about that. Referring to communities as herds, in some respects, it's a little, perhaps terminology we can improve on. But yeah, that's certainly a concern. Reduced vaccination rates certainly can impact community health, and anyone who's been looking at the news and what's going on in other countries that ought to be a concern. I also think we need to balance parental rights as well as legitimate concerns about the safety and efficacy of vaccinations. And there was conflicting testimony this morning on the efficacy and safety of vaccinations. So we need to look. I think we need to look into that closely and really move thoughtfully on this issue.
I look forward to hearing if it comes over. It is an issue. I'm a registered pharmacist, and I believe you should have a religious right, but I'm also of the generation that remembers the parents' generation who had polio. My sister and I, as little kids, of course, that's before you had measles vaccination, whooping cough and things. So I think there's a concern. Washington State's had a low vaccination rate for a long time. This discussion has come up when our former Secretary of Health, Mary Selecki, was in charge, and we've focused so much on children. So the fact that we've not done a better job in this state raises concerns. So I'm glad we're talking about it before things get worse. Any other questions on any issues?
I'll make a comment about vaccinations. As you may recall, I had a bill a couple of years ago that would require a signed form in order to be exempt from vaccinations, and that had to be signed by your doctor.
That was in 2011, right?
Right. And it simply put that, you know, at least you were getting the information. I'm not sure how much that has been retained and how much it's been put into action, but I will tell you this, having now gone through several outbreaks of pertussis and whooping cough in the general area on Whidbey Island and other types of disease that we know are communicable diseases that have vaccinations, that we could keep from having those in our communities. It's a serious, serious issue. When you have small children that are being exposed to life-threatening diseases, it's not something to take lightly.
How are you going to weigh the studies, the statistics? Because you can find a statistic or a study that'll tell you almost anything. So how are you going to determine what's right? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the exception of Senator Bartlett, who's a pharmacist, y'all aren't scientists.
Yeah. I'm a lawyer, not a clinician. And, you know, I think that what is compelling, I think, in this discussion is going to be the evidence of infant mortality post vaccinations. You know, there were several parents who testified that their newborns had died within a short period of time after getting vaccinations. You know, so I think that will be a compelling fact. Also, there was some dispute as to whether or not the 95% you know, herd immunity percentage is always desirable, because other communities had less than that percentage, and yet less childhood diseases than other communities that had a higher percentage of community vaccination. So, as a layperson, I'm going to look to you know, medical experts in evaluating the scientific studies on this issue. And again, also, I think we have to balance. There are competing values here. You know, parents testified that this is a violation of parental rights to make informed decisions regarding their children. We had medical professionals testify that this is a violation of medical ethics because of the lack of informed consent as well. So this is a very complex issue that, again, it will not be. It's not going to be, you know, resolved via a two-page bill analysis or a 2-minute testimony during a committee hearing. I mean, we need to really, I think, as I mentioned previously, proceed thoughtfully on this and look at the abundance of evidence and scientific studies that are out there.
At the end of the day, too, you know, once all the information is compiled, once we've had an opportunity to dig into it, I don't think this is going to be one of those interesting issues where it's not going to be a caucus position in any of the 4 caucuses. It's not going to be a party position. It's going to come down to your being able to take that information and based on your own interpretation and from the experts that you've brought in to talk about it, plus your own personal convictions. There's going to be decisions that are going to be made as individual legislators and the people that we all represent. And so I think it's one of those interesting issues that is very important. But at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting for us to see how the votes go. You know, as we've seen oftentimes in issues like this, probably those who may have the least in common politically end up on the same side of the issue based on their own interpretation of what we come through with during the public hearing process.
Senator Parlin, there's been some competing proposals on restructuring solar energy incentives and the tax program that the legislature put in place 10 years ago. What's your caucus position on that? Is there any interest in seeing what comes out of the House? How do you approach that issue?
Well, I'm sure if anything comes out of the House, Senator Erickson will hear the bill. But I know he is the lead in our caucus, chairing the committee, and has put out some alternatives or actually maybe some programs to work with Initiative I-937. I actually signed on to that bill. I come from a district that has probably 6 or 7 dams and all produce electricity. So I think the conversation is worth having, and it's a little bit premature for me to know where it's going to end up, but we'll follow after Friday of this week, which is the cutoff day for policy committees. We'll follow which bills get out of both the House committee and our own committee very carefully.
Tomorrow morning, there's a hearing on Representative Carlisle's bill to replace the death penalty with life in prison without possibility of parole. What are your thoughts on that measure, both in the House and in the Senate, and the chance that it comes over to the Senate?
I haven't followed that one.
Well, that's going to be in judiciary, and we had this discussion last session. You know, Washington State has one of the highest levels of review and scrutiny that we provide to criminal defendants who are facing possible death penalty, capital punishment. You know, this really is going to become an issue of it's really going to be one's moral judgment. Are you anti-death penalty, or do you believe that there are, in some rare instances, the state should have that capability to take another life? And we're going to have that hearing tomorrow in judiciary. You know, the argument that we ought to abolish the death penalty because it costs too much is disingenuous, because my colleagues in the defense bar have intentionally raised the cost of capital cases over the last several decades to then argue that it costs too much to prosecute death penalty cases. So, you know, that argument is disingenuous.
So what do you personally think? Should the state of Washington have the death penalty or no?
I believe that yes, I believe that Washington State's aggravated capital punishment statute is not only constitutional, but it can be very helpful in terms of prosecutors who are negotiating. You know, the case in point is the Greenway or the Green River Killer. Those 47 families received closure because of the death penalty potential that Gary Ridgway was facing. And so I do think in certain rare instances the death penalty is appropriate, and it's appropriate for prosecutors to have that discretion to charge those cases when the facts warrant.
Question for Senator King and Representative Orcutt, I suppose, but anybody else who wants to take it. The transportation package you laid out, Senator King, had some money for sound transit. Didn't get them all of what they say they need to get light rail out to places like Tacoma and various other directions. What was the thinking behind how you landed on that amount of voter-approved tax authority, and what do others think about whether sound transit should be able to go out to voters for a ST3?
Well, the theory was they asked for 15. From my limited knowledge, I would say that people usually ask for more than they want. They're in various discussions. We heard some lower numbers that were presented from time to time, and I would say that what we put forth exceeded some of the lower numbers that we had heard. So we thought it was a balance between the 15 that they wanted and some of these lower numbers that were kind of kicked around, so to speak.
Any idea what it would buy in terms of how much light rail or how much?
It's about $11.2 billion if they instituted all three of those possibilities at the levels that we put in the proposal.
I had a question about the gas tax.
Mm-hmm.
Washington, from what I've read, is in the minority of states even looking at a gas tax increase this year. How is that sustainable? How would that
Well, I think you'd have to go, I think you'd have to go back and look at what the other states have done over the last several years. I think you also have to go back and look at what other states are doing and how they collect their money for transportation. A lot of them have a sales tax that is used to fund their transportation systems. So I think it's a matter of, you know, what states are you talking about, and how do they fund their transportation systems, and have they increased any of those fundings over the last 5 or 6 years?
Okay, and when you're talking about increasing gas prices, that was some of the criticism against the cap and trade system, raising fuel taxes. What was the trade-off? Well, the trade-off is that if you do this with a gas tax increase, it's protected by the 18th Amendment, which says it has to go for highways, roads, and bridges. When you do it with a cap and trade or that type of a system, you can say, yeah, we're going to use it for transportation, but that would include also all the multimodal possibilities as well. There's no assurance that the actual roads, highways, and bridges would necessarily be used to maintain those entities with this money, whereas if it's gas tax, it's got to go there.
Well, and furthermore, the cap and trade proposal wasn't just about transportation. There was money that was going to go for other uses in the operating budget, and then a certain percentage of that was going to be used to mitigate the negative impacts on some of the employers that would be hit by it. So, I mean, they've admitted right there that it's going to be a hardship on some of our employers in the state, and that's a huge concern. You know, our economy is still is still struggling. There are a lot of people out there that still are without jobs, 6, 7 years after the Great Recession hit. So there's still a lot of concerns out there. We've got a lot of work to do to get ourselves back to the employment levels. Now, you can't just look at the unemployment numbers, because they don't account for a lot of people that have fallen off of the unemployment system, that aren't making claims. They're not eligible for money anymore. Or they've just given up. And it also doesn't factor in the underemployed, doesn't factor in those who have left jobs and gone out on their own and are struggling to make it on make their own business, and are coming in with far less money than what they were when they held the job. So we've got to be careful that what we do here doesn't negatively impact job growth, because we absolutely still need that. You have to look at what the employment numbers are rather than the unemployment numbers. And our employment numbers are still considerably lower than what they were prior to the Great Recession.
I don't know the details, but I saw a headline in the clips that Idaho is considering a gas tax. So, we have to remember that 2003 and the 2005 package, we didn't do anything to deal with maintenance and preservation. So sooner or later, those potholes that we all drive over have to be looked at, and that's all across the state.
The Senate Healthcare Committee today heard a piece of legislation that would expand to post-traumatic stress disorder, the disorders to which people could use medical marijuana. It would add it to the list of disorders for which you take medical marijuana. I'm curious, Senator Parlett and Senator Bailey, since you're on that committee, what you think of that proposal, and if there's as we work on medical marijuana this year, if there's an intention to maybe incorporate that into what's done with all of the legislation that's out there.
Well, on that hearing particularly, I'm not sure where I've landed. There were two sides at least to that issue, but I know medical marijuana is used for a variety of things. As a pharmacist, I actually voted for that initiative because in dealing with pain, my attitude is whatever works. I feel a little differently about the recreational side because, as you've heard me say before, marijuana is still an illegal drug considered by the FDA. Schedule 1, totally illegal, so I don't like the mixed messages. But how that ends up, I'm not sure. Do you have any feelings about that?
Well, I would agree pretty much with what Senator Parlett just said. The difficulty that I saw in that, and certainly asked the question early on, was in regards to our veterans. If there's an illegal substance that's being utilized, and that means illegal on the federal level, how would that impact their veterans' benefits, I wanted to make sure that if this goes forward, that we don't have an adverse effect on their benefits and their ability to get other types of medical. One other thing that was brought up was the fact that it was not reimbursable by veterans' health care. So there are a lot of unanswered questions. As you heard in the testimony, and this is widely known, we still don't know what the effects of long-term use of marijuana has on the brain. So there's still a lot of unknowns around this whole issue. But at the same time, I certainly want people to get the help that they need when they need it, especially for pain.
Nobody's going to ask the ports question. The ports question? Come on.
You already said you were going to talk about it. So
Come on.
The legislature's leaders have already sent the letter that we...
Finally. I mean, look, the port issue is something that we need to be paying attention to here. Washington State, as the most trade-dependent state, has a lot to lose in this whole thing. I think one of your papers actually reported here just in the last week or two, we had an Asian client that has now decided no longer to bring their products through the Washington State ports and are moving out not only of the state but out of the country, going up into British Columbia. We've got potentially some long-term losses, you know, when it comes to products coming in and out of the state of Washington. At the end of the day, it's still cheaper to run stuff through British Columbia and California because by way of the waterways, it's quicker to get through there anyway. And so Washington State long-term on this, if we don't solve this problem very, very soon, and if you recall back in the early 2000s, there was a similar situation that happened where our ports we had this situation going on with the ports being on strike and going through all their negotiations, and we ended up ultimately having, under the Bush administration, we had the federal government stepping in because there is a clause that does allow them to do that, that is contrary to public belief out there. There is a clause. No, these are not federal employees, but the impact that they're having, not only on our state, but other states around the country is enormous. And while we've only got 500 or so employees directly impacted by the ports, you've got tens and hundreds of thousands of jobs that are directly affiliated to this issue in Washington State. Already we're hearing numbers of thousands that have been laid off because the products are not there. They're not either coming in or able to go out. And so when we start looking at the amount of revenue we're talking about here, I don't know if you've talked to any of our folks in the agriculture industry, but many of them are off by 20–25%. That's our largest export market, is agriculture. And to be off by 20–25% in a multi-billion-dollar, market that it directly impacts Washington State, look at the taxes that we're not going to collect, that we're going to need, especially when we're talking about the final stages of negotiating for the McCleary decision, for our health benefits, for all the things that are going to be part of this budget. That's based on having a revenue forecast that we can count on. And if we see a big, large hit to that because of what's going on with our port issue come June and into the fall, it's going to have a massive snowball impact on us in being able to implement what we are supposed to be doing here and getting done in that 105-day window. So I hope that you're keeping a close eye on that, because I do believe that there is, from Washington, D.C. especially, a lot more that they could be doing on this. And
what would you suggest that they be doing?
I think that they should go ahead and do what was done back in, I think it was 2002 or 2003, where the federal government stepped in and dealt with it. And I can't quote the actual article in there. I just talking to the port people and talking to everybody's involved in this. They've all said this has happened before, but what is unprecedented is this is taking much longer than what happened back then.
Refresh my memory. What did the federal government do in 2002 or 2003?
They stepped in and they were essentially the hammer on the deal. They were the ones who this is what you've got to do, and they forced everybody's hand on this. And so, at some point, because my understanding of it, we're no longer talking about wages and benefits. That's been settled. We're talking about other things related to automation and training and things like that. Most of the ports around the world now are going to automated ports. We're not. And so that's one of the things that they want to do to try for efficiency and being able to gear up for future expansion in Washington State and along the West Coast for that matter. And if we don't come to terms with this quickly, while it's going to get solved at some point, my big concern is based on the costs that it takes for these goods and services to come through Washington as compared to British Columbia and or California, we end up in the long term getting hurt the most. And it's going to, being export, import, you know, as far as what we need as a state, it's going to hurt us terribly in the future. And so I think, you know, making sure that the public is aware of what the impact is and what the concerns should be related to our budget as we go out into the future can be enormous. And it's one of those hits that is going to hit us hard. And the other thing too is that even if they solve the problem today, all the experts have said that it's going to be at least 3 to 6 months to get us on track, catch back up. And if it takes 3 to 6 months from today, we're going to see a forecast in September then that's going to hit us really hard, not to mention June. And so I'm very, very concerned when we're trying to come to final negotiations down here that we really know what we're dealing with on a financial level. This could hurt us terribly.
So I raise apples, cherries, pears, some wine grapes, and I'm hearing from the apple growers all the time on this issue. We have time for one more question. And if nobody has one, I'm going to have Senator Bailey, if she can do it very quickly, explain this novel idea of lowering the cost of tuition because we are 12th highest in the United States. Well, I'll see. Any questions?
I do have one.
Then we'll hold that till the future because I want you to pay attention to her bill. And Senator Bruns. Go ahead.
Budget writers in both chambers have talked about the possibility of sending Initiative 1351 back to the voters. I'm wondering what the caucuses, especially Representative Christensen and Senator Parlett, what you think about that idea of doing that with a lower amount of votes than will be necessary to just suspend the initiative or amend it in the legislature.
Well, we're going to have to deal with it, and the choices are just what you said. Either take a 2/3 vote to get rid of it or change it and send it out to the public again. But we knew at the very beginning when that passed, and it barely passed. So thank goodness most taxpayers figured it out. Might be an okay idea. How much is it going to cost? How are we going to pay for it? Nobody knows. The governor didn't deal with it. The House puts their budget out first. I guess we'll have to see. And hopefully the budget writers will come to an agreement on what we do. I don't think they've landed specifically, but by all means, there's not the money to pay for it.
And from my perspective, personally anyway, is it also passed, not only was it close, but it passed during a record low voter turnout. And I think that, you know, everybody's acknowledged there's a huge price tag attached to this, which was not attached to the initiative. And of course, there's some bills floating around that people are considering to deal with that aspect of it. But if you were going to have an impact like this, especially on the heels of what's going on with McCleary and the intention of the legislature to fund McCleary to the level that we deem is necessary to do, it leaves a huge hole. And I think that all four corners of the building, and including the governor, which I think was evident in the budget proposal that he put out, which he doesn't take care of it at all in his budget. We've all acknowledged there's a financial problem. So if people really want this, is the opportunity or the option of going back to the voters to say, okay, you know, you want this, are you willing to pay for it to the extent that you've asked for, especially if we're going to have a large voter turnout in the future, hopefully, on something like this. I think that it's definitely a viable option that we have to look at.
Okay, next week we'll see you again.
Thanks.